We're constantly searching for how do you get the narrative impact and feel like someone heard a story and got the totality of this subject through the lens of a single interview. And so we call that like the enhanced interview format or the narrative style interview.
Welcome to The Format by Chorus Studios. Technology is always changing, and so is the format, or how we produce and consume media. The Format is a monthly newsletter on Substack and a podcast, where I, Flo of Chorus Studios, talk to you, producers, co-hosts, founders, about the newest and the best practices in podcasting today and tomorrow. From technique to technology, we will explore what new AI tools are podcasters using and why. How to prep for a podcast interview as a host or a guest. Which mics are best for your budget? And even, what happens in your brain when you listen to a podcast? These are all questions I will be asking on The Format. So I hope you'll join me on The Format on Substack. Hey, Stephen, great to have you here. Good morning.
So good to be here, Flo. Thanks for having me.
You were a reach guest for me, so thank you for shining a light on my little show.
Happy to do it.
So let's jump into your background, your career. I first discovered you because I was working in climate tech podcasting, working on a show called The World Changing Podcast, and was really inspired by all of your work at Latitude Media, all of your various shows. Was watching your evolution from green tech media into podcasting and then to Latitude Media, which is now podcasting and events and newsletters. And anyway, I was like, I need to know more about this guy and like learn how he does it, because I would love to emulate some of your great work.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out. Happy to share any of those experiences. It's been a really interesting journey, kind of being at the front edge of this growing industry of climate tech and clean energy, and also podcasting and sort of figuring it out as the industry has grown. So I've been really lucky that I've been at the intersection of those two things.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me, how did it start? Why journalism? Like, was there a moment, even in your childhood, where you were like, I need to tell stories, or like, I need to get the truth out there?
Yeah, I was always a kind of a performative kid. And when I was in 4th or 5th grade, I would make these fake radio shows on my little boombox and record tapes. And so I always knew that like I wanted to talk for some reason, and they were all jokey and just playing, obviously, at that time. Then when I was in high school, I did a lot of content creation with a group of friends. We made tons of films. I was good friends with a very talented filmmaker. I was really into the production aspect of it, and he was very talented and knew how to direct. And they, I look back on that with pride. Like, there was some really cool content coming out of it, but this was before you could share it very easily. And so we just did it for our group of friends, and there wasn't like mass distribution. Part of me wonders what that would look like if we had started doing that in this era.
You might be the next, it might have been the next obsession these days,
Yeah, I mean, it's so cool to see like 17-year-olds or 23-year-olds making films now in Hollywood. Yeah. But I loved doing that. And I really liked the production aspect of like sort of bringing people together, coming up with a plan, like executing the creative vision. When I got into college, I realized that I really liked journalism as well. And so I knew that I wanted to tell stories, but then suddenly like I got more into documentaries. I got more into just talking to people and then translating their stories. And I got the journalism bug in school. Ended up doing this internship in DC that had me at the front edge of doing radio reporting in DC at congressional hearings, at the Supreme Court, at the White House press gaggles. And I got exposed to, I was like a 20-year-old kid, and I was there with a press pass to all these places in Washington, seeing how the White House press corps worked, and I loved it. I fell in love with it. This was when I was, a sophomore in school, and I came back and I immediately wanted to be in radio. That was like the moment that I made the shift. And then I became news director of the radio station. And around that time, it was around 2004 when people started talking about podcasting. And I was playing around with like time-shifted news as the news director of the radio station. I just started doing the news programming online, right? And then created an RSS feed so that people could, download it to their
You were
iPod
way ahead of
at
the
that
curve.
time. And like, no, but not many people listened to it, but it was just a way for me to experiment and see how to sort of time shift this stuff and not just do it live over radio. It was around the 2004 time frame that I got into radio, but also saw what was happening in podcasting. Mm-hmm. And then when I got out of school, I got this great job working for a magazine that was focused on renewable energy, the business of renewables. This was 2006 when the industry was just starting to become a much more serious mainstream industry. A lot of money was coming in, and they hired me to produce a show. And so I got to produce that show, kind of borrowing what I learned in playing with podcasting. And like, I got to fail in front of people for a long time until I finally became good at it.
Were you producing and hosting?
Yeah, I was producing and hosting. And so it was just through a lot of tinkering that I knew what to do. I had played with lots of different types of software. I'd interviewed lots of people by that point. It was like the perfect position for me at that time. And I had to fake being an expert too. Mm-hmm. I'm like 22, 23, and I'm interviewing all these people who are really smart and know a lot about technical subject matter. And so I just had to pretend that I was somewhat of an expert, or at least figure out how to ask the right questions.
Right.
And having to do that really quickly forced me to figure out how to ask really good questions and how to make technical content translatable and how to take someone who is maybe a technical authority and turn them into an interesting person that can carry a 20, 30-minute conversation.
Gold. It's all gold. I mean, first thought I had when you were telling me about that experience creating this podcast for this, would you call it a green economy?
Like a renewable energy, like the business of renewable energy magazine.
Renewable energy magazine. I think a little less so now, but like 4 years ago when I was starting to make podcasts for people, there's still a lot of questions around like, how do you format, like within the episode, like what do you need? Like an intro, a hook clip, is it scripted? Is it interview? There's like, among people I work with that aren't in this space, it's like, what is it still? Because there's so many different types and people are still trying to digest like what a podcast is. Mm-hmm. So I can only imagine like what it was like for you being like, I'm going to create this podcast back in 2006. If I was in that position, I'd have to have a lot of confidence to be like, I'm just, this is what it is.
Yeah, there weren't a lot of models back then. I mean, my model was NPR. I just grew up listening to public radio. And so I was like, okay, let me translate how they might intro a show into this show that I'm doing. And now there are so many ways into finding an audience, and there's so much more pressure on hooking an audience early because of the way the algorithms serve up the content. That didn't really exist in the same way when I was doing it. So I was able to let's call it slow audio, do slower audio that people responded to because there wasn't a lot of other distraction. And that's what I loved about podcasting, that you could have a long form conversation and people would listen to the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And it got people curious and interested, not firing off comments on social media or something and being angry about what you put out. People were really they loved it. They were invested in it. And that's why I fell in love with podcasting in the first place. Now, in terms of the hooks, that's changed a little bit. I'm still learning that. I think we've kind of come up with some new ways of doing it, but I'm borrowing from other people who are doing it really well, for example, across YouTube. And so there's a lot of ways to do it now.
Agreed. And there's a lot of budgets that could happen, various versions. We can talk about that. You were, so early into that space, and then you were having to learn as you went and try to ask good questions and build your confidence and your ability to maybe not fully understand everything, but understand it enough to hold a conversation of value for an audience, and even maybe ask some dumb questions that helped audience members understand it better.
I mean, there's literally no other way to do it. I mean, now, obviously, there's a lot of debate about how AI impacts our cognitive abilities. And yes, you have tools now that can make you seem like an expert because you can shortcut a lot of that expertise and sound like an expert. But the only way to really do it is to ask dumb questions, figure out what the good questions are, immerse yourself with people who know way more, and then you get it. I've never found the actual shortcut, and I was lucky to have a platform where I could, learn all of that in real time in front of an audience.
Is there anything about that phase of your life where you were so new at it and kind of
learning everything for the first time that you miss at times?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do still keep a white belt mentality, meaning like I'm always imagining myself as a white belt and other people have other black belts and have more to teach me. And so I think that if you take that approach, you're always kind of tapping into that early self where you're feeling excited about what you're learning. And so I think like anything, I get a little nostalgic for those days, but I think the attitude is really the same.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a good reminder. Whenever I run into people that are really successful in my mind, like you, and they're so kind and open and sharing and have a white belt mentality, you can feel it. I think it's part of what makes someone successful. It's like the ability to like stay humble and learn and grow and connect with people.
Totally. And those are the people I gravitate toward. You know, I totally agree. You feel it. And those are the people you want to be around.
Totally. Well, were you doing much writing at any point? Did you have an experience like going from collecting content in written form to then doing the radio shows and the podcast?
Yeah, I had to do both. So we had an online presence and I was writing regular features, doing the podcast, and then we actually had a series of 5 different magazines, and so I would write features for some of the magazines and help edit. So it was pretty wide ranging, and once I got about a year or 2 in, I was doing a lot more writing. At first it was really focused on 80% the podcast, and then it became like 50% the podcast, 50% writing and editing.
Were you taking content from podcasts and turning it into articles, or were they separate pieces?
It was both. Sometimes you had a great interview and it was easy to turn it into an article. Other times you would just do original reporting and then you'd talk to someone and say, oh, they would be really good for the podcast. So it was a circuitous thing and they fed into each other.
That's so cool that you were doing that back then. What are some of the lessons, like in your mind, how do you think about presenting information in the written form versus the audio form?
The audio form is always much punchier. It's like a single idea per sentence. It's a lot of fragmented sentences in my mind. You really want to move the audience forward with an idea after idea after idea. And so this is for scripted audio. We do a lot of narrative stuff too. So not just the roundtable conversations, but in narratives in particular, and then in your scripts, maybe introducing a show, you want it to feel like each idea is moving forward in a really concise way. And so I just am way punchier. I'm breaking things up when I'm editing or writing for audio. Because I studied journalism, it was always drilled into me to be really concise. So take out fluff, but you have more room to be artful. You can carry multiple ideas in a sentence. And I think you have a lot more leeway when you're writing for someone to read it versus hear it.
That's actually really helpful for me to hear from you because I hadn't figured out in my mind what some of the differences are, but you're right. And it's going to help me like approach writing my blog versions of my episodes versus, how I approach scripting or organizing content for an audio podcast. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And this was actually funny that when we were launching Latitude Media, we were starting to launch all these newsletters and I was getting back into the writing mindset. And I had been doing audio for so long. And I wrote the opening to our first newsletter, and my co-founder read it. And he's like, man, you've been writing for audio way too long. Like, it was, every sentence was like a fragmented sentence. It was like, and I had to rip it up and kind of rewrite it again. They are pretty differentiated.
I struggle with that. I mean, I don't have a background in journalism writing for a magazine. I have a wide range of other experiences, but I kind of wish I had that background because it would give me a little more confidence when I'm going to write the written companion piece to some of my podcasts. That's really good advice. So you mentioned that you love the format because it's punchier and more personal. Is there anything else about podcasts that you love why you keep doing it?
Well, I think anybody who has been podcasting and has gotten an audience can feel the parasocial relationship. And that it goes back to the personal element of it. Like you do actually have a relationship with your listeners and they feel really connected to you because they found a way to integrate you into their lives. In audio, of course, it's often when they're driving, they're commuting, they're doing their dishes, they're walking their dog. And that's the special thing about it. People consume way more of it because you're often in those hours when they're by themselves doing something for a long period of time versus quickly snapping to another tab and reading a minute of an article and then going to the next thing, or, flipping over to another website. Like, you just capture attention in a completely different way, and that translates into relationship with the audience that's really special. And about a year into what I was doing, when I started going to conferences, it was really the only show focused on the business of clean energy at that time. So we got an audience really quickly, and all the people who were listening to podcasts who were in the industry were kind of listening to it. And like, all of a sudden people would come up to me like they thought they knew me. And it was so cool. And I think it's just a well-known thing in audio now that parasocial relationship is really important. So I loved that because I like being friends with people and like hearing what they're responding to. And that was always very different than like someone's terse comment on the bottom of the page or something, right? It's just a very different relationship.
Yeah, and I wonder, video versus audio, the big debate. Yeah. I love video. I started in media to do video, but I think I prefer to listen to podcasts even if they have a video element. That's the most functional way to listen when you're like doing your chores or driving or whatever, but also it's so intimate.
Yes.
And I think it's an even almost stronger parasocial relationship than video, because you're only taking in the voice and the words and the intonation, and you're not assessing the visual of the person or their facial expressions. And it sort of simplifies the communication to a more, in my experience, a more pure, less judgmental experience.
Absolutely. The judgmental thing is really important too. And I think that's why I love podcasting. So now that we're picking up more folks on YouTube, we can see in the comments that the comments just tend to be weighted more toward judgmental comments. It's much more weighted toward negative comments. And you see, everybody has this experience on social media with replies to whatever you've put out. But like, these platforms are sort of engineered to tap into our negative reactions, whereas in audio specifically, people are much more willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. They feel much more personally connected to you. They're willing to hear an argument out over a long period of time. There's friction between how the audience responds to what you're saying, and there's friction between like what you're saying and how the audience responds to it, like on a comment page or something. And so like, on YouTube, it's like an immediate comment. They hear you say one thing, they're going to like nitpick it or whatever it is. And I'm a big believer in video. I think that like audience growth is really important there, but it is very interesting to hear how people respond to both of those things.
That's a really interesting insight that you're having, is because you have bigger, more well-known shows. You have more eyes on your YouTube shows than I do yet. So I'm not experiencing that yet. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's just people who are on the computer and they've got their keyboard, and they can just react in real time like that. I think also the visual component like brings up more judgment in people for some reason. Your race, your age, your whatever, your hairstyle, your background, like it's necessary for growth, but it's also like a double-edged sword because it's not really the intention of the content.
Yeah.
I think.
And part of it is the immediacy too, right? You can listen to something and maybe you're out walking your dog or doing something and you hear something and you're like, oh, that's not quite right. But then you like hear the rest of the conversation and your reaction to it is in the context of the whole conversation, and you're willing to see that person as a whole person or their whole argument. And so that absolutely impacts the way that you respond to whatever you're feeling nitpicky about or that you had a reaction to. And when you're instantaneously able to provide feedback, then like you may zoom in on the thing that like makes you seem more nitpicky or negative than actually you are. Or so I just think immediacy has a big role to play.
So talking about audiences, something I've struggled with a bit is, and every situation is different. For the format, I feel like I have a pretty clear idea of what my audience is. But for you and your experience of determining an audience for a podcast or a newsletter, how do you think about that? Do you think of like a specific person or an archetype or?
So for us, we're very much focused on people in the business of clean energy. And so part of this is just having met a lot of people, over the last 20 years, been to a lot of conferences. Like I understand the audience very deeply. what they're looking at when they're surveying their competitors, when they're trying to raise money, when they're surveying a market. I know very concretely what they want, but early on I had to figure that out. And so part of it was understanding very concretely that, like, okay, I know I'm talking to someone who has technical knowledge here. I know I'm talking to someone who is running a company. I know that they're not going to want to hear some generalist version of what this story is. What are the technical details that are interesting that is going to be relevant to them? So that has shaped my coverage over the years, and it's gotten easier to do that because I know the audience so well. But I have always taken like a very specific business focus, which has made it easier to understand the audience. I did take a little bit of break from business journalism and was doing sort of climate science and policy reporting for a blog run by the Center for American Progress called Climate Progress. And that was in 2011, 2012. And that was a very different audience. That was very much a generalist audience. And we had to translate science to a very wide audience that didn't necessarily know the science that well, or to a policymaking audience. And that was a very different exercise. And that was a little bit harder because I had to figure out, like, okay, what are the details in here that matter? There's a lot of metaphors you use. There's a lot of simplification. And so I think that, like, sitting back and asking yourself some really clear questions about who that audience is and why they care about the information is really important before you, like, start doing the podcast or writing.
Yeah, and I love the idea of going to a conference where that audience is and speaking with people directly and asking them, just getting to know them, getting a sense of what they're aware of, what they're not aware of, what matters to them.
Yeah, in-person events are the best for that. And I highly recommend doing more of that. When you go to a conference, it's the conversations at the bar after the conference that are the most revealing.
Yeah.
And so if you are able to do some networking and get a feel for folks and stay there after the, official programming and really, like, understand people, then you can really get a more deeply personal sense of what matters to them.
Absolutely. Stephen, why do you think podcasting has blown up the way that it has? I don't expect you to have the answer, but I love to ask people this question because it's a curious question. Like, it became so popular in the last 5 years. Every celebrity has a podcast. Every thought leader has a podcast. A lot of businesses have podcasts. What do you think's going on?
I think it's a pretty actually complicated question. I think that the catalyst for this era of podcasting was definitely COVID, when everyone was sitting around and you had to have remote conversations. And suddenly that's when we saw people at home with access to equipment. The equipment had gotten more accessible and cheaper at that moment. And we were all having conversations. Everybody was on Zoom doing these remote conversations. We got used to the idea that, like, we were all a bunch of talking heads. And I think aesthetically that actually really mattered. I think we saw podcasts go from, there were like maybe 500,000 podcasts or something to like 2 million within a year and a half.
Wow.
And so I do think COVID had a huge role to play. At the same time, we saw, the rise of the individual creator becoming more important than legacy studios. And we have just undergone this major shift in journalism and media toward the individual, from the institution to the individual. And there's also been this focus on authenticity. People want to see someone as their most authentic self, and long-form conversations are the way to do that. And the monetization got better. Audiences were there. The monetization got better because the distribution got better when YouTube really leaned into podcasts around the 2021 timeframe. And so people were making a lot of money, and then everybody jumped into it. And so you had, I think, like, over the last 4 years, you've seen that confluence of things where distribution's gotten better, people want more authentic delivery. We got used to the idea that we were all having these conversations, and the platforms got much more accessible in terms of making the content. So
yeah, I love your emphasis on, like, the increasing value of the individual and the individual voice. And it's like perfectly in line with influencers and social media trends and podcasting. They kind of like came together. Influencers were already like, they've been making millions of dollars ruling the media landscape for longer, for the last 15, maybe 20 years. And now podcasting has become another avenue for those folks, those famous people or influencers, to connect with their audiences and create content. And 2021, that's when I started my business.
Yep.
I had been trying to do video, but I was just video at the time. I don't know, I haven't tried to make a fancy video in a while, but I couldn't get the budgets I wanted, $5 grand, 10 grand, 15 grand. But I could get a grand or two for an episode and do everything remotely and actually make money maybe.
Yeah.
And like Descript was a huge impact on me. Like Descript came out, makes my production processes so much more efficient than they were before Descript in Audition alone with no text.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love Descript, by the way, and the same. We use it for all of our narrative shows, for all editing, for video and audio pods, the roundtable pods. Like, our process is so much more efficient now and therefore less costly. And one final point I'll say is, like, just in general, the chat shows have dominated in the last few years because it's more inexpensive content too. It's just easier. Like, if you know how to talk to someone, the audiences are there, people want to hear a conversation, and it's like so much less time than managing, your own newsletter or writing a feature story a couple times a week or whatever it is. Like, and you can extract the content, create clips, write up the content. The dollars are there, the audiences are there, and it's just much more efficient to like start with the long form conversation as the basis of the content generation.
Agreed. I have some clients coming to me. It's hard to talk with them sometimes make sure we're on the same page about what the production is. Like, here's the budget, here's what I do for this budget. It's a talk show. But then, they might in their head be thinking it's going to be an NPR show experience. Those are scripted often. Mm-hmm. And there's like multiple people, and it's like a little movie without visuals. I worry about clients having the wrong idea. I struggle with trying to explain that to them sometimes.
Definitely. We work with a lot of clients and we make stuff on behalf of them or in partnership with them as well. So like we have the news side and we have the studio side, and we work with our partners, and we've gotten a lot of that. Like, I want this to be the Radio Lab of this and this. And I'm like, a Radio Lab episode can cost up to $1 million per episode, depending on the episode. Like, literally, I have heard those numbers that like it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not $1 million. Yeah.
I met one of the producers. He gave a sample of an episode, and they released it a year later. That episode.
Yeah.
They researched it and developed it for a whole year.
Yeah, it's incredible. I've sort of heard similar stories, and you have to temper expectations, right? Some of the shows that we do are in the, tens of thousands of dollars per episode, depending on the narrative show. Like, we've done documentary style shows, and so we've been able to like kind of work down from a sort of baseline, let's do an interview show together, up to like deep documentary style shows that can take 6 to 9 months to do for a series. And most people are on the lower end,
right?
But it really is about setting expectations, and you have to work up to that upper end as well. That took us years to get someone comfortable with like investing more money in a show.
Totally. I just have a client where there's multiple people involved. And so the person I spoke to, I know that she understands, but then her higher up is like, let's make it NPR. And I'm like, oh, we already have the budget set. So usually if I'm talking to the person directly, the decision maker directly, I can get that across. But sometimes when there's multiple people, it's like the people have different ideas, and it's hard to make sure everybody's on the same page. If I were going to do something like that, I would love to bring in a partner, because I haven't done a show like that, and I know it would be a big lift, but a fun challenge.
Definitely.
So you've got your brand shows for Latitude Media, and then you've got some client shows that you produce for clients.
Yeah.
Is there a common style? Or I know you said you do interview and narrative. Is there a style that runs across all of them, and how would you describe that?
It's a good question. There's definitely a median style. Our original shows are roundtable style shows that are pretty easy to produce once a week. It's easy to drop advertising into. It is easy for the co-host to show up every week and do the thing. A lot of the other shows that we produce tend to be, the median style is like narrative interview style shows. So we want to tell a story. We want to focus on an interview rather than like pulling 5 interviews together into a narrative show. We're constantly searching for how do you get the narrative impact and feel like someone heard a story and got the totality of this subject through the lens of a single interview. And so we call that like the enhanced interview format or the narrative style interview. And a lot of our shows tend to be focused on that we do with partners. We do really deep narrative shows as well that can, as I said, take 9 months to do and have 5 or more voices in an episode, and that you drop 5 episodes and that's it.
Yep.
And you've got a lot of sound design and music and, you know, external clips that you're weaving in. And so that tends to be way more intensive. But the general median approach is saying, how do you produce 12, 24, 30 episodes a year, giving someone like that premium experience, but making it efficient? And the way we do that is through telling stories around a single individual. And people know this, you know, if you think about How I Built This, right? Like this is one of the pioneering shows that did this really well. It's a very well-known show by a lot of people, so I think people can grasp. You know, Guy Raz would sit down with one individual. They would tell their story of like their origin story, the moment when like things almost fell apart, and then the redemption story or whatever it is. It's a very clear 3-act structure that weaves in and out of like the story's happening, then we go into the interview, then we pull back and the story's happening, then we go into the interview. Yep. And so we do a lot of that, which I think is really effective.
Cool. That is a really good example of that format. What was the descriptor you used for it again? We
use enhanced interview, I think, or narrative interview.
Narrative interview. I have heard it go wrong.
As these things can.
Yeah, yes. I can't remember which celebrity podcast it was, but I was like, this is boring.
Yeah.
Like, I've leaned away from that, I think, because I forgot that Guy Raz does. I mean, I've listened to How I Built This, but it's been a while. I think he's the best example of it. I've heard a couple celebrity shows where they're narrating the interview, and then they're in the interview, and then they're narrating the interview, and it's like not interesting to me.
Yeah.
I'd rather just hear the interview. Yeah. So, I haven't approached it because I felt like if a celebrity show can't get it right, maybe it's hard to do. But I think your point, like trying to get in a huge topic or a really big story into an hour or 45 minutes, that's probably how you have to do it, because you need to connect the dots in between sections of the interview to kind of weave it all together quickly.
Yeah, we're typically doing that with like an hour and a half interview and turning it into 20 minutes of content or something. So,
20 minutes. Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
25 minutes. Yeah.
Speaking of that, what length of podcasts do you think are ideal?
There is no ideal. I think people have shown that folks will sit around for these 4-hour, 5-hour podcasts on YouTube, and folks want snackable content. It's sort of what your audience will tolerate. And I know that sounds a little cagey, but like you kind of have to experiment and figure it out. I mean, when it comes to audio, there are some general rules, which is like the average commute time is 25 minutes. It's nice to give someone a story that's around the 25 to 30 minutes so they can complete the episode. And so I think that's like nice to shoot for. But we do episodes that are 45 minutes to an hour. It's an edited version of the conversation, but we feel like that's the level of detail we want to give it.
Yeah.
And it's fine. And, you know, the audience will consume it. And I just don't have a hard and fast rule.
Yeah.
I would say if you're unsure, keep it in the 25 to 30 minute mark, because that's like generally the amount of time most people have to devote to it.
I like that. And maybe even that's a good place to start, because it's a lower commitment for a listener to get through. And then, you know, if they come back because they like the host and they like the content and they like the show, then maybe they'd listen longer. It's a new idea I just had.
Yeah. And I would say that podcasts are well known for their banter and their loose style. I would say if you're just starting out, to try to keep things pretty precise. So like give the audience what you think they want pretty quickly so that they can make a choice right away about whether this is going to be valuable to them. And if you are starting the podcast and you've got 10 minutes of banter or whatever it is before you get into the thing, new audiences may not give you a chance. So if you're a little bit more established and people know you and you've done it for a while, I think the banter is okay, but being more precise early on is important.
That's one of my pet peeves. I mean, I like personality and tangents and, real conversation, but I don't like banter that has nothing to do with the subject matter of the episode. That's a pet peeve of mine.
Definitely.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. So for yourself, for your own brand shows and for your client shows, I know it's gotten really noisy. There's so many podcasts. People want big numbers, but they may not get them right away. How do you define success for like a new show?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Sometimes it's just about numbers, but most of the time for our audiences, they know that they want to hit the right folks who are listening, and they would be much more comfortable with a pod that's kind of in the low to mid thousands that reaches the right people than something that does, tens of thousands of listeners per episode. And so for us, it's like slicing and dicing the marketing, figuring out how to add engagement. We do live versions of podcasts for our audience and get people sign up for them. And, they give their email address and stuff, and we sort of know we can take the temperature check of who is interested in the subject matter and then promote the podcast. And there's like a way to connect directly with the type of person who you want listening to the show. And so I would say generally people are more interested in the quality of the audience than they are a giant audience. But we do have some where we do have a huge marketing budget and they want to see both quality of audience and large numbers. That can mean 50,000 or more listeners per episode. But like in the business world, if you're getting like 5,000 listeners an episode and you really know that you've targeted the right people, they're very happy with that. So it's a wide spectrum.
I think that's what's so smart about what you've done with Latitude Media is you've created this ecosystem of the renewable energy climate tech space, investors, founders, researchers, policymakers, and they all need to work together, right, to do business and move things forward, and they need to be in contact. And so you created that audience for them when they come to you to create a show with you, or however they work with you. They know they're going to reach their ideal audience.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why we put together a journalism team, an events team, a research business, and the podcast all together, because it creates a much closer connection to the audience. We see them at events. They subscribe to the research. They read the journalism. They subscribe to the newsletters. So when you do put out a new show, they really trust you. And you can bring in the right folks who are like already in that ecosystem.
You've built a lot of credibility in this space. You're a go-to source for news about climate tech, renewable energy, power grid, infrastructure, all that jazz. I wanted to ask you, I don't know if you have one, but any examples of where a podcast helped a company that you were featuring like raise money or meet their co-founder, or any sort of cool business story impacts from some of the podcasts you've produced?
Yeah, actually, over the years, we have heard from so many listeners who got their start in the clean energy industry because of the show. They heard about a company or a market opportunity. They were working in, a lot of the folks that we've heard from have been working in traditional tech, got really burned out by traditional tech and wanted to go into climate tech or clean energy, discovered the show and found their way into the industry. And now many of them are like senior level people, some of them are running companies, and it's so cool. I literally have dozens and dozens of these stories of people who discovered the podcast and were able to like totally restart or build their career in an industry that they feel really deeply about. So it actually happens quite frequently. It's pretty gratifying.
Very cool. You kind of rebranded a year or 2 or 3 ago.
Yeah, about 3 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. And that was when I realized you were going to be doing more events. Tell me about the vision for Latitude Media, this iteration.
Yeah. So I think we have multiple legs of the stool. When we're just doing podcasts, you can pick up audiences, but you don't have a close connection with those audiences necessarily. It's hard to know through just the standard analytics platforms who those folks are, what they want. And so what we did is we built the mouth of the funnel much wider. So we have the podcast and we also have journalism and newsletters. So we have a team of journalists who are reporting on the industry, who are constantly reporting and talking to the companies in the space, and people are subscribing to the newsletter. And we can both get the podcast in front of those newsletter subscribers and then get those newsletter subscribers to the podcast. So those things work together. Mm-hmm. And then we have an events business. And like everyone coming out of COVID wants to be in person. You know, I think we still see this tailwind for events 6 years later, 5-6 years later. And the people in the business world in particular, in our world, like they want to connect, they want to do deals, they want to meet each other, they want to understand what is happening because it's directly relevant to the way they're running their companies and investing. And so we use the journalists, the journalism team, and the research team to help create the content for those events. And then we market those to the newsletter subscribers, to the listeners, and a lot of those people buy tickets to the event. And then we have research on top of that. And so then we have a very small number of those overall readers who are willing to pay a premium subscription to deep research on a yearly basis. All those things work really well together, and they give you multiple touch points with the audience. And it helps you understand who the audience is as well, because they're giving you first-party data. They want to give you their first-party data, like their email address and their job title and stuff, because you're giving them something of value. And so you can, whatever it is that you're doing to monetize the audience, you're doing it with a much greater awareness of who that audience is.
Amazing. Would have been some of your learnings adding in, especially events and like business model wise? Is it more lucrative to have events?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
For sure. Maybe I'll draw this down to a scale that a lot of podcasters and stuff can understand. Let's say you're doing like a lifestyle podcast or something. I think it's pretty common for that person to do interviews and then like they write their own ebook on like, here are my top 10 things to live a better life or whatever it is. And then some subset of those listeners go and download that ebook, and now you understand who some of those are. And then you can go back and be like, hey, I'm actually going to have my like half-day seminar on eating healthy or whatever it is. And then some subset of those subscribers, those people who signed up for the ebook, are going to come to your seminar. And that's a pretty common thing in the podcast industry. We're just doing that at a much more supersized level that's very specifically tailored to business people. It's a model that people have played with generally. You're hooking the audience with your authenticity and your conversations. Then you're giving them something else of value, and they'll give you back some of the information about them. And then maybe you're developing some kind of premium product on top of that, and some subset of those listeners are going to that thing.
Love that. It's a good business model. What are some of the tools that you guys use to help with like automating emails and marketing and do you use HubSpot?
Yeah, we definitely use HubSpot. Yeah.
And you host all of your own newsletters on your own website, right?
Yeah, and we have like a whole tech stack that our marketing team manages, and I am not familiar with all the whole tech stack, but yeah, HubSpot's a core of what we use for sure.
Okay, cool. That's good. Interesting to know. Yeah. So in terms of two final questions, well, I think a punchy question would be about AI and podcasting. I was just texting with a friend who works for a media company. They do podcasts, but they also do websites and branding, and he was saying it's getting kind of hard because people don't want to spend $100,000 on a website anymore. They want to spend $10,000, and AI, in some cases, makes that possible. Maybe in websites. For other podcasters, what things are you excited about as for podcasting and AI, and maybe a little wary of?
Well, the thing I'm excited about is Descript, which you and I talked about. It allows you to automate workflows. I think in general, the use of AI tools to help with workflow automation is really great. And then our engineer also uses a lot of new AI tools to like make audio better. They're just all these different plugins that have gotten so much better over the last 5 years. And so you can take really tricky audio and make it sound really good if it's problematic. And so generally quality control and process are where I'm excited. I think in general where I'm nervous is using AI for shortcuts, like helping it do your draft of your script, and you're not putting a whole lot of like intellectual muscle behind it or figuring out like what is the hook here that really matters. I think that's just kind of an issue for every industry now, right? In creative industries in particular, how much should you struggle through the process and learn the thing versus have a tool that can help you do it? And so I'm really lucky that I went through my whole career struggling through ideas before I ever got the AI tool that can help me occasionally manage thoughts or I can bounce ideas off of. So I find it really helpful now, but I think I would have been a lot more skeptical if I were just figuring it out and I were really leaning on the AI tool. I'd be skeptical about how much am I actually learning and how much am I outsourcing. So I think that's the tension for everybody right now.
Where can people find you or support Latitude Media?
Yeah, I mean, latitudemedia.com is the place to go, and we've got all our newsletters there. You'll see our podcasts and our events if they're interested in climate tech and the clean energy business, and we're at Latitude Media on YouTube. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, sort of doing deep dives that people dwell on. It helps me do this sort of medium form content that people often add thoughtful comments to, so I really like it over there, and we're on all those platforms.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, and have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Flo.
Thank you for listening to The Format. Head to substack.com, that's substack.com, to subscribe to The Format on Substack for our next monthly episode and blog about the future of podcasting. Stay real.